The ignored warnings. The Galactic Council was in chaos. Representatives from hundreds of alien species sat in the Grand Hall, their voices echoing in panic and disbelief. A towering figure stepped forward, his silver robes shimmering under the artificial lights. He was Eldar Vorthan, a high-ranking member of the Jothar, an ancient alien species known for their wisdom. His voice was deep and calm, but there was an urgency in his words. "I warn you again," Eldar Vorthan said. "Do not provoke the humans. Do not start a war with them." A murmur spread across the hall. The Jothar were respected, even feared, but their warnings about humans had always been met with skepticism. After all, humans were a young species. Their technology was primitive compared to the advanced empires of the galaxy. They had only recently begun exploring space. How could they be a threat? A deep, mocking laugh echoed through the chamber. Grand Marshal Krallis, the supreme leader of the Valkar Dominion, stepped forward, his red armor gleaming. His reptilian eyes burned with arrogance. "Are we supposed to be afraid of these primates?" Krallis sneered. "They barely understand interstellar travel. They have no warships, no powerful fleets. What can they do against the might of the Dominion?" Some council members nodded in agreement. The Valkar Dominion was one of the strongest military forces in the galaxy. Their fleets had conquered entire star systems. How could a species that had only recently left its homeworld pose any real danger? Eldar Vorthan sighed. "You do not understand. The humans are different. They do not fight like us. They do not think like us. Every species in the galaxy has followed the natural path: war, expansion, diplomacy. But humans, they were born in war. They were shaped by conflict. If you attack them, they will not just fight back. They will destroy you." Krallis scoffed. "Enough of this nonsense. The Valkar Dominion does not fear savages. We have already deployed a fleet to subjugate their homeworld. Soon, Earth will be under our control." A silence fell over the hall. Eldar Vorthan closed his eyes for a moment. Then he simply said, "You have made a grave mistake." The first attack. Hours later, the Valkar war fleet entered Sol's system, moving towards Earth. Their massive battleships, each one the size of a city, hovered over the blue planet, ready to strike. Commander Xyros of the Valkar fleet stood on the bridge of his flagship, a smug grin on his face. "Pathetic," he muttered, looking at Earth's primitive defenses. The humans had a few space stations, a handful of warships, and planetary defenses that were outdated compared to Valkar technology. The invasion would be over in hours. "Begin the assault," Hyros commanded. Laser cannons charge, missiles locked onto targets. The Valkar fleet prepared to unleash destruction. Then, everything went silent. The bridge lights flickered. Screens glitched. The AI systems that controlled the ship shut down in an instant. "What's happening?" Hyros shouted. A strange, static-filled transmission appeared on the main screen. At first, it was unreadable. Then, slowly, it became clear. A human voice, calm, emotionless, spoke. "You were warned." Suddenly, the entire fleet lost control. Battleships started drifting aimlessly. Weapons refused to fire. Crews screamed in confusion as life support systems began shutting down. Outside, in the dark void of space, small objects appeared. They were human ships, but nothing like what the Valkar had expected. They were stealthy, their hulls absorbing all light. They had no energy signatures, no detectable movement. They had been waiting. The Valkar had not launched an attack. They had walked into a trap. The horror begins. On the bridge, alarms blared as a crew member shouted, "We are losing ships. They are disappearing." Hyros turned to the window and saw something that froze his blood. The mighty warships of the Valkar Dominion were vanishing. Not exploding, not being shot down, just disappearing, one by one, into the darkness. "No, this is impossible," Hyros whispered. A lieutenant screamed, pointing at the main screen. A new message had appeared, simple yet terrifying. You came to conquer. Now you will never return. The bridge doors slammed shut. The lights flickered again. Crew members grabbed their weapons, but it was too late. The darkness inside the ship itself began to move. Screams filled the air. Then, silence. Aftermath. The Galactic Council received a distress signal from the Valkar fleet, but it was only static. Every ship that had entered Sol's system was gone. No wreckage. No survivors. Just nothing. The council chamber was filled with an eerie silence as they listened to the final message sent from Cyros's ship. A voice, no longer confident, no longer arrogant, spoke in a broken, fearful whisper. They were waiting for us. And then the message cut off. Eldar Vorthan lowered his head. I warned you, he said softly. Now, you regret everything. The other council members sat in horror. For the first time, the galaxy understood. The humans were not prey. They were predators. And someone had just woken them up. Cliffhanger for Part 2. The Vanished Fleet. The Galactic Council sends an investigation team to Sol system to find out what happened. They discover a battlefield with no wreckage, no bodies, just emptiness. A single escape pod is found, containing the only Valkar survivor. When they open it, the survivor is shaking, whispering one sentence over and over. They were already there. The Vanished Fleet. The Galactic Council was in crisis. An entire Valkar fleet, one of the most powerful military forces in the galaxy, had vanished without a trace. No wreckage, no distress beacons, just silence. Panic spread through the council chambers. Some species demanded immediate retaliation against the humans. Others, remembering Eldar Vorthan's warning, felt something far worse than anger. Fear. We need answers, said High Chancellor Velrath, leader of the Galactic Council. His voice trembled slightly, though he tried to sound calm. Deploy an investigation team immediately. A fleet of elite scouts and scientists was sent to Sol system. Their mission clear: find out what happened to the Valkar fleet. They had no idea what awaited them. A silent battlefield. The investigation fleet arrived at the coordinates where the Valkar fleet had last been seen. They expected wreckage, damaged ships, maybe even human warships patrolling the area. They found nothing. No destroyed battleships, no lifeboats, no debris. It was as if the Valkar fleet had never existed. Admiral Cal Veros, the leader of the investigation team, stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the empty void. His species, the Tertii, were known for their cold logic and calculating minds. But even he felt uneasy. This doesn't make sense, Veros muttered. There should be something left. A battle this large doesn't just disappear. The sensors detected strange energy signatures in the area. It was unlike anything in the galactic database. Then, the communications officer gasped. Sir, we're detecting something. A transmission on a repeating loop. Veros turned sharply. Put it on screen. The message flickered onto the main console. The crew stared in shock. It was a human transmission. A simple, chilling message. You were warned. Veros felt a cold dread settle over him. Scan the area again. Look for any survivors. Minutes later, they found something. An escape pod, drifting in the darkness. It was from a Valkar warship. The only survivor. The escape pod was quickly retrieved and brought aboard the flagship. The scientists worked fast, opening the pod and pulling out the lone occupant, a Valkar commander. It was Commander Xyros, or at least what was left of him. His once proud red armor was torn, his face gaunt and hollow. His reptilian skin was covered in deep claw marks, but what terrified the scientists most was his expression. Thyros, the fearless war commander, was shaking like a terrified animal. His golden eyes, once filled with arrogance, were wide with pure horror. He whispered something, his voice barely a breath. Veros leaned in. What did you say? Cyros's trembling lips formed the words again. They were waiting for us. The entire room went silent. Veros frowned. Who? The humans. Cyrus shook his head violently. No, not just humans. Something else. Something worse. The scientists exchanged nervous glances. Veros stepped closer, trying to remain calm. What happened to your fleet? Where is everyone? Cyrus's eyes darted around wildly, as if searching for something that wasn't there. His breathing was rapid, shallow. His clawed hands gripped his own arms so tightly that blood began to seep from his scales. Gone, he whispered. They took them. They took them all. Veros stiffened. Who took them? Cyrus slowly lifted his head. For the first time, his voice carried a deep, soul-crushing fear. The darkness. Veros narrowed his eyes. That makes no sense. Explain. Cyrus let out a broken laugh, half sob, half madness. You think humans are weak. You think they fight like us. They don't. They don't fight wars. They hunt wars. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Veros felt something he hadn't felt in centuries. True unease. Then Cyrus lunged forward, gripping Veros's wrist with unnatural strength. They were waiting for us, he shrieked. They knew we were coming. They let us enter their system, let us believe we had won. Then, his breathing turned ragged. His voice dropped to a whisper. They turned off the lights. Veros's heart pounded. What does that mean? Cyrus looked directly into his eyes. They didn't just kill us. They took us. I heard them screaming, one by one. As they vanished, I saw ships disappear like shadows in the night. There was nothing we could do. Nothing. No weapons worked. No escape. No hope. The shiver ran through everyone in the room. Veros clenched his fists. He had fought countless battles, seen entire planets burn. But this was different. This was not war. This was annihilation. A darker truth. Back at the Galactic Council, the report from Veros arrived. The council listened in stunned silence as they heard the horrifying testimony from Cyrus. High Chancellor Velrath's voice shook as he spoke. You mean to tell us that humans did this? Veros hesitated. Then finally, he spoke the words that no one wanted to say. Not just humans, something else. Eldar Vorthan, the Jothar elder who had warned them from the beginning, slowly stood. His ancient eyes burned with sorrow. Now you understand, he said softly. Humans do not fight alone. They have something we do not understand. And now, it is awake. Silence filled the chamber. For the first time in history, the Galactic Council felt powerless. They had assumed humans were weak. Now, they'd finally understood the truth. The humans were never alone. And whatever stood beside them was something far worse. Cliffhanger for Part 3. The Silent Battlefield. The Council debates whether to attack Earth again or retreat entirely. Strange disappearances begin happening across the galaxy. Alien warships going missing, entire colonies falling silent. The investigation fleet detects invisible objects moving in the Sol system, something watching them. A final, terrifying transmission is received. You are already too late. The silent battlefield. The Galactic Council was in a state of quiet horror. The fate of the Valkar Dominion's fleet was no longer a mystery. It was a warning. Every ship had vanished. Every soldier, every commander, every warship, erased from existence. The only survivor, Commander Cyrus, had been left shattered beyond recognition. His mind was broken, haunted by something none of them could comprehend. And the worst part, there was no proof. No debris, no wreckage, no bodies, just empty space where an entire fleet had once stood. High Chancellor Velrath sat in the heart of the council chamber, his multiple eyes scanning the room. The most powerful leaders in the galaxy sat before him, each one struggling to process the unthinkable. "We need an answer," Velrath said, his voice low and firm. "Something logical." Eldar Vorthan, the Jothar elder, sighed deeply. "The answer is simple." A murmur ran through the room. Humans did this. Many council members shifted uncomfortably. They had always looked down on humans, young species, barely stepping into the stars. How could they possibly erase a fleet? Velrath shook his head. No, not humans alone. Thaxiros spoke of something else. Silence. Something else. The investigation fleet, searching for ghosts. The council, desperate for clarity, sent a second fleet to investigate. This time, it was not a war fleet. It was a team of elite scouts, scientists, and intelligence officers. Their leader was Admiral Calveros, the best strategist the council had. If anyone could unravel the mystery, it was him. As they arrived in Sol system, they did not announce their presence. Their ships remained cloaked, their weapons on standby. "Keep scanning," Veros ordered. "We are not here to fight. We are here to understand." Their scanners swept the empty void where the Valkar fleet had once been. And then, they found something. Not wreckage, not debris, but faint energy signatures, like shadows in space. The battlefield that wasn't there. Veros stared at the readings. The energy signatures were not natural. They weren't caused by any known weapon or explosion. It was as if space itself had been torn apart and then stitched back together. The scientists ran thousands of calculations. "Admiral," one of them finally said, "we are detecting something that should not exist." Veros frowned. "Explain." The scientist hesitated before answering. "These energy patterns, they resemble remnants of gravitational distortions, but they are not from our universe." Veros's heart pounded. "Not from our universe. Are you saying the Valkar fleet was pulled somewhere else?" The scientist hesitated. Then, slowly, he nodded. "That is our best guess." Veros felt cold. A message from the void. Before he could respond, an alert flashed across the control panels. An unknown signal was being received. "Sir, it's another transmission." Veros turned sharply. "From where?" The officer's eyes were wide with disbelief. "From inside our ship." The crew froze. A moment later, the message began playing on the main screen. It was grainy, distorted. A Valkar soldier appeared, his face twisted in terror. His breathing was rapid, uneven. His eyes darted around wildly as if something was watching him. Then he screamed. And the screen cut to static. Veros felt his blood run cold. Where did this come from? The officer shook his head. Unknown. It just appeared. Veros turned to the scientists. "Can you trace it?" One of them swallowed hard. "Sir, the message came from inside the ship, but there is no source." Veros clenched his jaw. "That's impossible." The scientist's face was pale. "I know." The first disappearance. Panic was rising on the ship. The crew, trained for war and exploration, had never experienced true fear, but now they felt it. And then it happened. A scream echoed through the halls. Veros and his officers ran towards the sound, weapons drawn. The sight froze them in place. One of their soldiers was standing in the middle of the corridor, or rather, what was left of him. His armor was intact, his weapons still holstered, but his body was gone. Inside the armor was only darkness, as if his body had been erased. Veros's hands clenched into fists. "We are leaving. Now." But it was already too late. The invisible fleet. As the fleet prepared to leave, their cloaking systems failed. The ships flickered. Their stealth fields shut down. And then they saw it. Just beyond their own ships, massive shapes began to materialize. They had no energy signatures, no recognizable form. But they were there, watching, waiting. Veros could not breathe. What? What are those? An officer whispered. And then, a transmission came through. This time, it was a human voice. Calm. Cold. You are already too late. Then, all power failed. The ships went dark. And one by one, they began to disappear. Aftermath. The fear spreads. Only one ship returned from the mission. Veros was not on it. The crew who made it back could not explain how they survived. They had no memory of escaping. One moment, they were in Saul's system. The next, they were back at the council. And yet, something was different. They had aged. Their bodies showed signs of months of starvation and exhaustion. But they had only been gone 3 days. High Chancellor Vel Rath demanded answers. The lead scientist's hands trembled as he spoke. We were wrong about humans. The room fell silent. They are not the dominant species. Velrath's voice was barely a whisper. Then what is? The scientist swallowed hard. We don't know. But they are here. Cliffhanger for Part 4. Humans were never alone. The Council considers a full retreat from human space. More alien fleets begin disappearing. The Jothar reveal a secret about humanity's past. The truth emerges. Humans did not rise to power alone. Something helped them. And now, it is awake. Humans were never alone. The Galactic Council was no longer debating war. They were debating survival. The second investigation fleet had vanished, just like the first. Only one ship had returned. The crew had aged unnaturally, as if they had lived through months instead of days. Their minds were fractured. Their reports were incomplete, scattered, filled with gaps. But one thing was clear. Something was inside human space, something beyond their understanding. And it was awake. The emergency meeting. The Jothar's secret. The council chamber was filled with a sense of dread. Leaders from across the galaxy sat in tense silence, waiting for Eldar Vorthan of the Jothar to speak. His species had warned them, had begged them not to attack humanity. Now, it was time to explain why. Vorthan's ancient eyes scanned the room before he finally spoke. You believe humans to be a young race, a new species stepping into the stars. You are wrong. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Humans are not new. They are not weak, and they have never been alone. Velrath, the High Chancellor, frowned. Explain. Vorthan let out a long breath, as if this secret had weighed on him for centuries. Long before humans reached the stars, before they even knew they were not alone in the universe, something found them. A hush fell over the chamber. Something ancient, something powerful, something that should not exist. Velrath's multiple eyes narrowed. What are you saying? Vorthan's voice dropped to a whisper. Humans were chosen. The words hung in the air like a curse. The shadows of old Earth. Eons ago, when humans were still primitive, scattered, fighting for survival on Earth, their world was visited. Not by benevolent explorers, not by conquerors, but by something else. A force so old it had no name. A force that did not destroy, but watched. The Jothar had found ruins on distant worlds, ancient relics left by long-extinct civilizations. Each of these civilizations had one thing in common. At some point in their history, they disappeared. The Jothar had studied the ruins, trying to piece together the truth. And the truth was terrifying. The same force that had erased those civilizations had come to Earth. But something different happened. Instead of vanishing, humans adapted. They changed. They survived. And somehow, they made an alliance. With it, the Great Silence. Vorthan looked at the gathered council members. You believe humanity was weak because they were late to the stars, because they did not expand like other empires. But what if I told you that was by design? Velrath's voice was barely a whisper. You mean to say, humans waited? Vorthan nodded. Yes, They did not rush into the galaxy. They did not seek war, because they knew something you did not. They were never alone. A cold realization swept across the chamber. The humans had never feared alien empires. They had never needed massive fleets, because they had something else protecting them, something older than any empire. And when the Valkyr attacked Earth, when they sent their war fleets, it woke up. The vanishing begins. The horror did not stop at the council chambers. The moment the truth was spoken, entire fleets across the galaxy began disappearing. A Kelvar armada patrolling the edge of their territory, gone. A Sithrek mining colony with millions of workers, silent. A high-security research station studying human biology. Only an empty shell remained. No wreckage, no survivors, just nothing. Velrath gripped the edge of his podium, his voice sharp. How do we stop this? Vorthan slowly shook his head. You can't. The room fell into chaos. The message from humanity. As panic spread, a new transmission arrived. It was from Earth. The council chamber fell silent as the screen flickered to life. For the first time, they saw a human. A woman dressed in a simple uniform, her face calm, her eyes unreadable. She spoke. Her voice was soft, but it carried a weight that sent chills through the chamber. You were warned. Murmurs of fear ran through the room. You believed we were alone. You believed we were weak. You were wrong. The transmission glitched, the screen flickering. For a brief second, another shape appeared behind her. Something tall, featureless, something that should not exist. Then the human woman leaned forward. This is not war. This is not revenge. This is a correction. The transmission cut off, and at that moment, the lights in the council chamber flickered. For the first time in history, the rulers of the galaxy felt true fear. Cliffhanger for Part 5. The regret begins. The council realizes they cannot fight humans, or what stands with them. More alien empires begin collapsing overnight. The Valkyr send a desperate plea for peace. A terrifying truth emerges. The galaxy was never ours. We were only borrowing it. The regret begins. The Galactic Council was paralyzed by fear. For the first time in recorded history, they were not debating who would rule or which empire was the strongest. They were debating survival. Empires that had existed for thousands of years were falling overnight. Entire fleets were disappearing. Colonies with millions of inhabitants had simply ceased to exist. No signs of war. No distress calls. Just silence. And all of it led back to one undeniable truth. The humans were never alone. The Valkyr's desperate plea. The Valkyr Dominion, once proud conquerors, were now begging for peace. In a secret meeting, Grand Marshal Krellis, the same leader who had mocked the warnings about humans, now stood before the council. But this was not the same Krellis. His once golden scales were faded, his proud stance weakened. He looked like a creature who had seen death itself, and survived only by chance. His voice, once full of arrogance, was now hollow. We surrender. A stunned silence filled the chamber. Velrath, the High Chancellor, leaned forward. What did you say? Krallis lowered his head. We surrender. We submit to humanity. Whatever they want, we will give them. The council erupted into chaos. This is madness. We do not even know what they want. We cannot surrender to a species we do not understand. Krallis slammed his fist onto the table. You do not understand because you did not see what I saw. The room fell into uneasy silence. I sent fleets. I sent warriors. I sent assassins. And every single one of them vanished. His hands trembled. Not died. Not killed. Just gone. As if they never existed. A cold fear settled over the council. You believe this is about war. About power. It is not. Krallis looked up, his reptilian eyes full of a terror none had ever seen before. It is about something much worse. The warning that came too late. As Krallis spoke, a new transmission arrived. It was from Earth. The council chamber fell silent as the screen flickered to life. A human stood before them. A man, dressed in dark clothing, his expression unreadable. His eyes, however, burned with something unnatural. He spoke. "You took our warnings as weakness. You ignored the Jothar's wisdom. You thought you could attack us and walk away." He tilted his head slightly, almost curious. "Now you understand. We were not waiting because we were weak. We were waiting because we were deciding." Vel'Arath leaned forward, his throat dry. Deciding. What? The human's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "Whether or not you deserve to exist." The council chamber froze. "And what did you decide?" Vel'Arath whispered. The screen flickered. For the briefest second, something appeared behind the human. Something tall, featureless, not human. Then the transmission ended. And at that moment, the lights in the chamber flickered. The disappearance of empires. As the council tried to process the message, reports flooded in. Entire star systems were vanishing. The Kelvar homeworld, once a mighty fortress, was now an empty rock. No cities, no people, no history. Just nothing. The Sithric fleet, which had been preparing for war against humanity, sent one final transmission. A single voice, broken with terror, whispering. "They are inside the ship. We cannot see them. We cannot fight them. Oh, gods, the lights are going out." Silence. Their fleet was never seen again. Even the Jothar, the only species who had tried to warn the galaxy, were now afraid. Eldar Vorthan, their wisest elder, stood before the council one last time. His voice was calm, but his hands trembled. "It is over." Vel'Arath clenched his fists. "We cannot just surrender. There must be something we can do." Vorthan turned to him, his ancient eyes filled with pity. Do, High Chancellor." He exhaled slowly. "There is nothing left to do. The choice of the galaxy." The council had two options. Surrender to humanity. Accept their judgment, whatever it may be. Try to fight back, and risk total annihilation. No one spoke. For the first time in galactic history, there was no resistance, no defiance. Only fear. Vel'Arath finally spoke, his voice barely a whisper. "We will send a message." He swallowed hard. "We will ask them what they want." The last transmission, the final message, was sent to Earth. A single question. "What will you do with us?" The response came swiftly. A short transmission. A human woman appeared on the screen. Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "We have already decided." The transmission cut off. And across the galaxy, the lights began to go out. Cliffhanger for Part 6. The final stand. The council prepares for their final decision. Accept judgment or resist. More fleets begin disappearing. A last attempt at peace is made. But will humans listen? A terrifying question is asked. What if this was never our galaxy to begin with? The final stand. The Galactic Council was no longer a governing body. It was a funeral gathering. A funeral for the entire galactic civilization. Empires had ruled for thousands of years, and yet, in mere weeks, everything had collapsed. The Valkar Dominion was gone. Their homeworld, their fleets, their people, vanished as if they had never existed. The Kelvar strongholds, the Sithrak mining worlds, the Allaran trade routes, every powerful force in the known universe had been silenced. Entire star systems were empty. Entire species were missing. The galaxy had become a graveyard with no bodies, and at the center of it all stood humanity. The Council's last meeting. The remaining leaders of the galaxy gathered for one final meeting. There were no more arguments, no more power struggles. Only one question remained. Would they fight, or would they surrender? Vel'Arath, the High Chancellor, stood before them, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "We are the last of the great empires," he said. "We must decide our fate." The room was silent. Eldar Vorthan of the Jothar, the wisest among them, slowly stood. "The humans have already decided for us." Velrath clenched his jaw. "We do not know that for sure. We asked them what they would do with us." Vorthan's ancient eyes were filled with sadness. "And they answered." Velrath frowned. "No, they only said." His voice caught in his throat. He remembered the final transmission from Earth. "We have already decided." And then, the lights across the galaxy began to go out. The shadow of judgment. Across the remaining civilizations, strange things were happening. The Kelvar archives, containing thousands of years of history, suddenly went dark. Every record, every data entry, erased. The Tertiary Fortress moons, protected by planetary shields that had never been breached, were silent. No communications, no signs of life. The Etheri fleets, a species of explorers who had stayed out of the war, sent a final message. "They are here. We cannot see them. We cannot hear them. But they are here." Silence followed. They, too, were never heard from again. A desperate last stand. Only one great power remained. The Council fleet. It was the largest armada ever assembled. The combined forces of every empire that was left. Thousands of warships. Millions of soldiers. It was their final act of defiance. Velrath stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternum, staring at the fleet outside. He turned to his second-in-command. "Are the weapons ready?" The officer nodded, but his hands trembled. "Yes, High Chancellor. But what do we fire at?" Velrath's lips pressed into a thin line. That was the problem. There was no enemy fleet, no human warships, no invasion forces. The enemy was nowhere to be seen. And yet, the galaxy was still dying. The choice. A transmission came through. It was from Earth. Velrath's breath caught in his throat as the same human woman appeared on the screen. Her face was calm. Too calm. Her voice was gentle. "We will give you a choice." The council chamber fell silent. "We do not take pleasure in this, but you brought this upon yourselves." Velrath's fists clenched. "What do you want from us?" The woman's expression did not change. Submission or extinction. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The council erupted in chaos. "We must fight. We cannot surrender. If we submit, what happens to us?" The human woman simply blinked. "You will belong to us." A chill ran through Velrath's veins. "And if we refuse?" The woman tilted her head slightly. And then, in a voice so soft it was almost a whisper, she said, "Then you will never have existed." The transmission ended. The council froze. What kind of war was this? This was not about territory, not about conquest. This was something far worse. This was erasure, and humanity had already begun. The final battle. Velrath turned to his fleet. "We fight." The officers around him hesitated. "High Chancellor, are you sure?" Velrath's voice was cold. "If we surrender, we are nothing. If we fight, we die as something." He looked out at the vast, empty void of space. "Prepare all weapons." They would fight. They would make their last stand. Even if they never won. Even if they were already too late. Cliffhanger for Part 7. Regret and Surrender. The final battle begins. The Council fleet fires its greatest weapons. But nothing happens. Humanity delivers the final judgment. The galaxy's fate is sealed. Regret and surrender. The final battle had begun. Or at least, that's what the Galactic Council believed. The largest fleet in history, assembled from every remaining empire, hovered in space like a final defiant monument to their past power. Thousands of warships, millions of warriors, all standing against the inevitable. Their weapons were charged. Their shields were raised. But there was nothing to fight. No enemy ships, no human forces, only the emptiness of space. And yet, they could feel it. Something was here, watching, waiting. And then the lights flickered. The final stand. A battle against nothing. High Chancellor Vel Rath stood on the flagship Eternum, his gaze fixed on the darkness before them. He had fought 1,000 wars. He had seen planets burn, fleets shatter, civilizations collapse. But he had never seen anything like this. "Where is the enemy?" someone whispered. A low hum spread through the fleet, a strange, unnatural silence. Then, without warning, the first warship disappeared. It did not explode. It did not send a distress signal. It simply blinked out of existence. The crew on the Eternum froze. Then another ship vanished. Then another. Panic spread. Officers screamed orders. Weapons fired wildly into the void. But there was nothing to hit. Vel Rath clenched his fists. Find the enemy. Track the energy signatures. A horrified whisper came from the sensor operator. "Sir, there is nothing. There are no ships, no life signs. It's as if they were never here." Vel Rath's heart pounded. This was not war. This was something else. Something worse. The last transmission. A new message appeared on the main screen. A transmission from Earth. The same human woman stood before them. Her expression was calm, almost sympathetic. "This is not revenge," she said softly. "This is not a battle." The council fleet shook with fear. Vel Rath's voice was hoarse. "Then what is this?" The woman blinked slowly. A decision. A cold realization settled in the room. This wasn't about war. This wasn't about conquest. This was something far worse. Judgment. And it had already been passed. The erasure begins. The Eternum's crew gasped as ships continued vanishing one by one. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Just gone. A scientist screamed as he watched the readings. "Sir, the stars." Vel Rath turned sharply to the window. His blood ran cold. The stars themselves were disappearing. Not one by one, not naturally. Entire sectors of the galaxy were going dark. Reality itself was being rewritten. "We were never meant to rule," Eldar Vorthan whispered, his ancient eyes filled with sorrow. Vel Rath refused to accept it. "No, we will not go quietly." He turned to his crew. "Fire everything." The fleet unleashed their full power. Every weapon, every missile, every superweapon ever created. It was the most powerful attack ever seen in history, and it hit nothing. The weapons passed through empty space as if the universe itself had already moved on. And then, the council chamber itself began to fade. One by one, the leaders began to vanish. Vel Rath felt his hands start to dissolve. His body was turning into nothingness. His voice trembled. What are you?" The human woman appeared one last time. The future. Vel Rath opened his mouth to scream. And then, he never existed. The aftermath. A galaxy rewritten. When it was over, the galaxy had changed. There were no great empires, no galactic council, no war records, no history of conquest. It was as if they had never been. And humanity. They remained, untouched, unchallenged, the new rulers of the galaxy. But they never spoke of what had happened, because deep in their ancient history, before they ever reached the stars, they had made a deal, not with gods, not with technology, but with something older than both, something that had always been there, in the shadows, waiting. And when humanity called, it answered. Final scene. The last words of the forgotten. In a distant, dying part of space, where no one had tread for centuries, a final echo remained. A whisper, faint, almost lost in the void. It was Vel Rath's voice. We were never in control. This was never our galaxy. We were only borrowing it. The darkness swallowed the last echo of his words. And then, even his memory was erased.